The storm came down out of the dragoons like something with a grudge. I'd seen weather before. I keep a book on it, been keeping one 30 years, but I'd never seen a woman walk out of it. She came up my wagon road on foot, no horse, no coat worth the name, one hand under a belly heavy with child and the other pressed flat against the wind like she could push it back. She didn't cry out. She didn't wave. She just kept coming, one boot in front of the other, the way a thing comes when it has already decided that stopping means dying. I want to tell you I did the right thing without thinking. I didn't. For about 4 seconds I stood on my porch and thought about all the trouble a stranger brings. And then I thought about the grave up on my hill and the small second grave beside it, and I stopped thinking and started running. What I'm about to tell you took 3 days and cost me more than I'll ever put in my ledger. There's a widow in it, and a child that hadn't been born yet, and an Apache woman named Talana who owed me nothing and gave me everything, and a handful of men who came to my door with the law in their mouths and murder behind their teeth. I'm an old man now. I've buried people I loved and lied to people I feared, and if you sit with me a while, I'll tell you about the night the storm brought me a family, and about the morning I had to decide whether I was brave enough to keep it. Stay with me, this one still keeps me up. The rain hadn't started when she reached the porch. That's a thing I remember wrong sometimes, and I have to correct myself, because I was keeping a weather book even then, and the book doesn't lie the way memory does. The rain came later. What came first was the wind, that dry, mean, front-edge wind that shoves the dust ahead of a storm like a man shoving a chair aside to get to a fight, and it was in that wind that she came up my road. My name is Elias Crane. Folks called me Eli when there were folks around to call me anything. That autumn there weren't many. My wife Ada had been 3 years dead by then, and the boy she'd been carrying when the fever took them both had never gotten a name, so I couldn't rightly say I'd lost a son. I'd lost the idea of one, which is a queerer, quieter kind of grief that nobody knows how to bring you a pie for. I ran cattle on 1,100 acres of hard grass in the Sulphur Springs Valley, in the Arizona Territory. In the shadow of mountains, the Apache had names for long before I had a deed. I kept 40 head that year, down from 200 in better times. I kept one dog, a yellow bitch named Sundry who'd lost half an ear to a wolf and all her patience to age. And I kept a book. I ought to explain the book, because it matters to what comes after. Every morning of my grown life I have written down the sky. Not for any science, I never had the schooling for it. I just write what I see. Oct 14. High cloud from the west, thin as milk, wind rising by noon. Ada would have called it a going somewhere sky. That last part, the Ada part, I only started writing after she died, and I know it's foolish, a widower talking to a dead woman in the margins of a weather book, but a man alone develops habits the way a still pond develops scum. Nobody's there to skim it off, so I wrote to her. I told the book things I couldn't tell a living soul, and the book kept them, and that was the whole of my conversation most weeks. On the morning the widow came, I had written, Oct 22. Cold got teeth in it. Sky in the northwest the color of an old bruise, something's coming, batten the north gate. I had not battened the north gate. I want that on the record because I've spent a lot of years being harder on myself than any judge, and the plain fact is that if I'd done my chores instead of standing at the stove nursing a third cup of coffee and feeling sorry for a dead man's memory of himself, I might have been out on the range when she arrived. And then she'd have come up to an empty house. And then this would be a shorter story, and a worse one. But I was home, and I heard Sundry stand up off the porch boards and growl low, the way she growled at strangers and never at weather, and I set my cup down and went to the window. There was a shape on the road. At first I took it for a man on account of the walk, head down, shoulders squared, that grinding, no-nonsense gait of somebody covering distance they hate. Then the wind kicked her skirt, and I saw the skirt, and then I saw the belly, and my whole body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with October. I have to tell you what that did to me, because if I don't, you won't understand the 4 seconds. A pregnant woman, alone on foot, in front of a storm in that country, that was Ada. That was Ada as I'd found her the day she started bleeding, 40 miles from a doctor, telling me she was fine, telling me to finish the branding, walking around the kitchen with her hand under her belly exactly like this one had hers, because a woman carrying low learns to hold the weight from beneath. I saw all of that in an instant, saw it and hated seeing it, and some cowardly animal part of me thought, don't open that door. You buried this already. You can't afford to dig it back up. That's the 4 seconds I told you about at the start. I'm not proud of them. I've known preachers who'd tell you a good man doesn't hesitate. I've buried a couple of those preachers, and I've noticed the ground took them same as it takes the rest of us. The truth is that goodness, when it comes, most often comes after the flinch. The flinch is just proof you understood the cost. Then I looked past her up the road toward where it crested the low rise a half-mile out, and I did not see anyone following. Not yet. And I looked up the hill behind my house, where two mounds of earth sat under one crooked juniper, the big mound and the little one beside it, and I said out loud, to nobody, to Ada, to the book that wasn't in my hand, all right, I hear you. And I ran. She went down about 30 yards from the porch. Not a feint, she caught herself on one knee, deliberate, the way you'd kneel to fix a boot, and I understood later she was resting, that she'd taught herself to fall in a way that looked like choosing, so that if anyone was watching, they wouldn't see a woman collapse, they'd see a woman pausing. That's a thing you learn when you've spent a while being hunted, though I didn't know that about her yet either. I only knew she was down and I wasn't to her, and I ran faster than these old knees had any business running, and I got my arm under hers and I felt how light she was. Light everywhere but the middle. Starved light. She'd been walking a long time on not enough. "Ma'am," I said, "ma'am, I've got you." She turned her face up, and I got my first real look at her. She was younger than I'd figured, maybe 5 and 20. Dark hair pulled back and coming loose in wet strings, though it hadn't started raining, so the wet was sweat, cold sweat, fever sweat maybe. A hard, handsome face, all plains and stubbornness, a face that had been pretty once and had traded pretty for durable somewhere down the line. And her eyes, I'll never forget her eyes because they weren't afraid. I'd braced for fear. Instead, they were doing arithmetic. She looked at me and I could see her adding me up. How big, how old, how armed, how dangerous could she outrun me if she had to? And she couldn't. And she knew she couldn't, and she decided to gamble on me anyway because the storm behind her was a surer death than the stranger in front. "Are you alone out here?" she asked. Her voice was low and cracked and level. Now that's a strange first thing to ask a man who's just picked you up off the ground. Not help me or thank you or where am I, she wanted to know how many people were in the house. And any fool with sense would have heard that question and got careful. I heard it and got careful too. But I answered honest, because I've never been much good at lying to a woman's face. It's a gift I only developed later that same night under pressure, and I've regretted having it ever since. "Just me," I said, "and a bad-tempered dog." Something in her let go, just a hair. Her shoulders came down maybe an inch. "Good," she breathed. "That's good." And then a look crossed her face, a tightening, a going away behind the eyes, and her hand clamped down on my forearm hard enough to leave marks I'd find that night, and she said through her teeth, "You need to get me inside. It started." "What started?" She looked at me like I was slow, which God help me I was. "The baby," she said. "Your fine dog and your empty house are about to have company, mister, whether we like it or not." I got her up the porch steps with the wind trying to take us both, and I kicked the door open and sundry shot inside ahead of us like she'd been invited, and I laid the widow down on the bed in the front room that had been Ada's bed, that had been our bed, that I hadn't slept in since the funeral because I couldn't stand the middle of it. I laid a stranger down in it, and I stood there a second not knowing what in the hell to do with my hands. She saw that too. "You've done cattle," she said. It wasn't a question. Between the tightenings, and they were coming, I could see them coming, could see her whole body draw up like a fist and then slowly open. She talked, fast and practical. "You've pulled a calf that was turned wrong. You've had a mare foal. You know more than you think you do. It's the same mostly. It's just the same, and I'm going to tell you what I need, and you're going to do it, and we're both going to pretend you're not scared. Can you do that?" "I can do that," I said, and my voice only shook a little. "Water, clean cloth. Whatever whiskey you've got, not for me, for your hands and mine. A knife, sharp, and a way to make it hot." She reeled it off like a woman reading a list she'd read to herself 100 times, and I realized she'd been walking 3 days rehearsing this, rehearsing how to survive the thing her body was going to do to her out here where there was nobody, and now there was me, and I was the whole of her luck. I got the water. I got the cloth, Ada's good sheets, the ones I'd never used, torn up now for a stranger, and I didn't hesitate over that, which is its own small, strange grace. I got the whiskey and the knife. I built the fire up high. And the whole time she talked to me between the pains, and I understood she was doing it on purpose, keeping me steady by giving me tasks, the way I'd steadied a green horse by keeping its feet moving. And I loved her a little for it right then, not the way a man loves a woman, but the way you love anybody who is drowning and still throws you the rope. Her name was Nora. She told me that between the third and fourth pain. Nora Callum, she said, and then she watched my face when she said Callum, watched it real close, and when the name didn't mean anything to me, she relaxed again, and I filed that away. The name was supposed to mean something, to somebody. She'd been braced for it to mean something to me. Eli Crane, I said. This is my place. I know whose place it is, she said, and gasped and gripped the torn sheet and rode the pain down. I've been walking toward it for 2 days. Man in Dews Cabeses told me there was a rancher out this way who kept to himself and didn't ask questions and didn't hold with, she stopped. With certain men, she finished. I hoped he was telling the truth. Which men? She looked at me. Outside, the first rain hit the window all at once, a fistful of it, like the storm had finally caught up to her at the door. And thunder rolled down off the dragoons, long and low, the kind you feel in the floorboards. The men who are looking for me, Nora said, who are going to come here, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. And when they come, another pain took her, a big one, and this time she did cry out once and bit it off. And when it passed, she was crying, not from fear, I think, but from the plain exhaustion of holding herself together for 3 days and finally being somewhere she could set the weight down for 1 minute. When they come, she said, you have to tell them I'm not here. You have to. Because if they find me, they'll take the baby, and Eli, they'll bury me on your hill next to whoever you've already got up there, and they'll do it slow. I didn't ask how she knew about the hill. She'd have seen the mounds walking up. I didn't ask a lot of things I should have. I said, nobody's taking anybody off this place. Which was a fool's promise. I was one old man with an old rifle and a bad knee. But I've noticed the truest things a man ever says are usually things he's got no right to promise, and something about saying it out loud put iron in me that I'd been missing for 3 years. I hadn't had anything worth protecting since the hill. Now, God's own joke, a total stranger had walked out of a storm and handed me a reason to be brave, right when I'd most given up on finding one. The labor went long and it went hard, and I won't dress it up, because there was nothing pretty about it, and Nora would spit on me for making it pretty. It was blood, and it was fear, and it was a woman doing the oldest, most dangerous work there is with no help but a rattled rancher who kept forgetting to breathe. The storm settled in over us like it meant to stay a week. The rain came sideways. The lamp guttered. Sundry lay in the doorway with her half ear up, and twice she growled at the dark, and twice I went to the window with the rifle and saw nothing but water and lightning, and twice I told Nora it was nothing, and I don't know if either of us believed me. Around what I judged to be midnight, things went wrong. I'd pulled calves, like she said. I knew when a thing was coming right and when it wasn't. This wasn't. The baby had turned, or never turned. I didn't have the words for it, but Nora's body wasn't opening the way it needed to, and the pains had gone from a rhythm to a war, one on top of the other with no rest between. And she'd stopped talking me through it because she didn't have breath to spare. And there was more blood than I liked, a lot more. And I was watching a woman start to die on Ada's bed, and I was going to lose 2 of them in the same room 3 years apart, and I could not. Eli, she grabbed my wrist. Her grip had gone weak, which scared me worse than a scream would have. Eli, there's a woman. What? An Apache woman, a healer. She's a pain, a bad one, and Nora's back arched off the bed, and she made a sound I'd only ever heard a dying animal make, and when it passed, she was gray. In the hills, south. The man in Dews Cabeses, he said there was a band camped in he said she'd birthed babies for Eli. I can't do this alone, and you can't do it for me. You have to find her. I'm not leaving you. You're not leaving me, you're saving me, they're the same thing tonight, and she almost laughed, God love her, gray as ash and joking about it. Go, please, go now, take your dog, take the lamp, I'll hold. I've been holding 3 days, I can hold another hour. Every part of me that had ever loved anybody screamed not to walk out that door. The last time I'd left a woman in that bed to go do a necessary thing, finish the branding, ride for the doctor, I'd come back to a body. I knew, standing there, that if I walked out and came back to Nora dead, I would put the rifle in my mouth before spring. I knew it as sure as I knew the sky. And I went anyway. That was the first of the heavy decisions, and it wasn't even the hardest, and I want you to sit with how a man makes a choice like that. Not bravely, not with his jaw set, but with his hands shaking and his heart calling him a murderer with every step to the door. I saddled my horse in the black, and the wet with lightning showing me the buckles one flash at a time. I looked back once at the yellow window of my house with a dying stranger inside it. And I rode south into the storm to find a woman whose people my people had spent 40 years trying to kill. to beg her to save the life of a white woman she'd never met. The last thing Nora said before the wind ate the house behind me was, "Her name's Talana. Tell her," and then the thunder took it, and I never did hear what I was supposed to tell her, and I rode 2 hours in the dark not knowing the words that might have made the difference. I found the camp by its dogs before its fires. I found Talana because she was already awake, already standing at the edge of the light with a blanket around her shoulders, looking south toward my ranch through the rain like she'd been expecting somebody, though to this day I don't know how. And when I got down off my blown horse, filthy and frantic and out of breath, and I opened my mouth to explain in my broken scraps of her language and worse Spanish, she held up one hand and stopped me. "The woman who is running," Talana said in English better than mine. "She reached you." "She's dying," I said. "The baby's turned, please." Talana looked at me a long moment. Rain ran off the end of her braid. Behind her, an old man said something low and hard in Apache, a warning, and I understood enough to know he was telling her not to go, that a lone Apache woman riding to a white man's ranch in the dark was how Apache women ended up dead, blamed for whatever went wrong under that roof, and he wasn't wrong, and everyone in that camp knew he wasn't wrong. And Talana went and got her medicine bag. I have thought a great deal in the years since about why Talana came. She owed me nothing, less than nothing. I was one more white rancher squatting on grass her grandmother had been born on, and every white rancher in that valley was, to her people, a slow theft with a face. I'd never done her a kindness. We traded twice, years before, cautious and wordless, a haunch of my beef for a basket of her people's mesquite meal, the kind of trade that happens at the edge of a tree line with both parties ready to run. I didn't know her. She barely knew me. She came because a woman was dying, and because, she told me this much later, when we'd become the kind of friends who can say hard things, because she had lost a daughter to a birth gone wrong, years before in the mountains with no one to help, and she had made herself a promise over that small grave that she would never again stand near a dying mother and do nothing. She had made the same promise I'd made on my hill, over the same kind of grave, and neither of us had known the other carried it. That's the thing about grief. It digs the same shape in everybody. You just can't see the hole in another person until you're both standing in it. We rode back hard. The storm had settled into a steady, drenching, all-night rain, the mean edge gone out of the wind but the water relentless, and Talana rode ahead of me because she knew the ground better in the dark than I knew it in daylight. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say that wasn't a prayer, and we were praying different ones. I want to tell you the light was still on in the window when we came over the rise, and it was, and I have never in my life been so glad to see a thing burning. Inside, Nora was alive. Barely, gray as the ash in the cold end of my fireplace, drenched, shaking, her lips moving in some private count she'd set herself to keep from going under, but alive. When Talana came through the door in her wet blanket with her braid dripping and her medicine bag in her fist, Nora's eyes found her and something crossed the widow's face that I can only call recognition. Not that she knew Talana, but that she knew help, knew it the way a drowning person knows the shape of a hand, and Nora said, "You came," in a voice like a hinge, and Talana said, "Be quiet now and work," and got down to it. I'll tell you plain, I don't have the words for what Talana did over the next 2 hours, partly because a good deal of it happened with her back to me and her hands where a modest man doesn't look, and partly because it was beyond me, a knowledge older than my whole race on that continent, passed mother to daughter down a line of women who'd been birthing babies in these mountains since before there was a word for Arizona. She turned the child, I don't know how. She had Nora up off her back and squatting, gripping the bed frame, which every instinct I had said was wrong, and every result proved was right. She sang low in Apache, not a performance, just a working sound the way I hummed to a nervous horse, and Nora, who I'd have bet couldn't stand, held on and pushed and screamed and pushed. And Talana's hands did their old terrible tender work, and I stood at the head of the bed and let a stranger's wife crush my hand in hers, and I said the only useful thing I know how to say, which is a person's name over and over. "Nora, Nora, you're here, you're here. Nora." And then, near 2 in the morning, in the middle of a thunderstorm, in a bed where I'd lost my own family, a baby cried. It's the loudest small sound in the world. I've heard a lot of noises in 70 years. Gunfire, rock slides, a bull elk in the rut. A woman I loved dying, and not one of them ever went through me like that first thin, furious wail. Talana held her up. It was a girl, red and squalling and perfect and furious, fists going, mad as a wet cat at the cold, ugly world she'd been dragged into, And Nora made a sound that wasn't a word, that was every word, and reached for her. And Talana laid the baby on her chest. And the whole room, which had been a battlefield 1 second before, went soft and warm and holy in the space of a breath. I turned away. I'm not ashamed to say it. I turned around and faced the fire so the two of them wouldn't see an old man come apart, and I put my hand over my mouth, and I looked up through the ceiling toward the hill where my Ada was, and I said in my head, there, see, it can end another way. It doesn't always have to end the way it ended for us. And I don't know that I believed in anything on the other side of that ceiling to hear it, but I said it, and it helped. Behind me, Talana said quietly, she's small, but she's strong, listen to her. And you could, over the rain, that outraged little voice going and going. The mother lost much blood. She'll live if the bleeding stops. It's stopping. Build the fire. She'll be cold for a day. I built the fire. I built it like it was the only thing I'd ever known how to do. The knock came at dawn. I want to set the scene exactly, because the next hour was the hinge my whole life turned on, and I've never told it right to anyone. The rain had thinned to a gray drizzle. Nora was asleep, finally, deep and drained, the baby tucked against her under Ada's quilt. Talana was at the table drinking coffee I'd made too strong, her hands still stained, her eyes hollowed out with the particular tiredness of someone who's carried another person's life all night. Sundry lay by the fire. I'd just written in my book, I remember it, I have it still, Oct. 23, rain slackening, a child born in the night living. Ada, we did a good thing. And Sundry came off the floor with a snarl, and hooves sounded in the yard, more than one horse, and a man's voice called out, "Hello, the house!" in that flat, hard, official way that isn't a greeting at all. That's a demand, and my whole body went to ice. I looked at Talana. Talana looked at me. And here is where the second heavy decision came, the hardest one, and it came at me from two directions at once. Because there were, that gray morning, two women in my house that armed men might want to hurt. There was Nora, who they were hunting. And there was Talana, an Apache woman, alone in a white man's house, which in that territory in those years was all the excuse a certain kind of man needed to do a certain kind of thing and never answer for it. If I opened that door and there stood the men hunting Nora, I had to hide Nora. But if I opened that door and there stood any white men at all, in that mood, I had to hide Talana too, and hide the fact that she'd been here, because her helping us could get her killed as fast as Nora being found could get Nora killed. I had one root cellar. I had about 10 seconds. "Talana," I whispered, "the cellar under the rug, take the baby, no. No, the baby has to stay with the mother, a baby'll cry." I was falling apart, doing the arithmetic Nora had done on the road and coming up short every way. And Talana, who had every reason to already be running out my back door and into the hills and away from all of it, put her coffee down and said one word, "Wait." Then she did a thing I have carried in my chest for 40 years as the finest act of nerve I ever witnessed. She stood up and she smoothed her blanket and she said low and fast, "I am your cook. I've cooked for you 2 winters. If they are decent men, this is nothing to them, and I am no one worth their trouble. If they are not decent men, then you will need someone standing up in this room who is not scared, and the widow cannot stand, and you, my friend, are shaking like a leaf." She almost smiled. "I have been not scared in front of worse men than these. Let me do the part I am good at. You do the lying. You'll be better at it than you think. Fear makes a man's face honest." "Hello, the house," the voice came again, closer, and under it the creak of leather, men getting down off horses. I looked at the bed where Nora slept with her daughter. I looked at the rug over the cellar, and I made the call that Talana's steadiness let me make. I did not hide anybody. I decided in the space between 2 heartbeats that a house with a sleeping sick woman and a newborn and an Apache cook was a more ordinary, more boring, less suspicious thing than a house that was too empty, too quiet, too plainly hiding something. The best lie isn't an absence. It's a fuller, duller truth stood in front of the real one. I opened the door. There were 4 of them. I'll not give you all their names because I only learned 2, and one of those I'd rather forget. The one in front was a big soft-faced man in a good coat, a townsman's coat, out of place on a range at dawn, and he had a paper in his gloved hand and a lawman 2 steps behind him wearing a badge that I'd have bet was borrowed. The other 2 hung back with the horses and had the flat, empty eyes of men who are paid by the day to do what they're told and not remember it after. "Morning," the soft-faced man said. He looked past me into the house, quick, a man used to looking past people. "Sorry to trouble you so early. We're looking for a woman, traveling alone, maybe on foot by now, dark hair, and she'd be," a delicate pause, "she'd be far along." "With child." That's a lot of woman to be wandering my range, I said. He smiled, it didn't touch his eyes. Her name's Nora Callum, she's my late brother's wife. My brother passed 6 weeks back, God rest him, and Nora, well. He sighed like it grieved him. She's not been in her right mind since. Grief does that. She ran off from us in Wilcox, took some things that weren't hers. We're not looking to be hard on her, you understand. We just want her home safe, her and the child, before something happens to them out here. He held up the paper. I've got a document here says I'm the child's rightful guardian, being the nearest kin, seeing as how the mother's not fit. All legal. So if you've seen her... And I understood the whole of it, standing in my doorway with the drizzle on my face. There was no grief in him. There was money in him. The brother had left something, land, cattle, a claim. I never did learn exactly what, and it went to the child. And this soft man in his good coat meant to have the child and be rid of the mother. And he dressed the whole rotten business up in a legal paper and a borrowed badge because that's how his kind of evil always dresses, in paperwork, so that it can do murder and call it custody. Nora hadn't stolen anything. Nora had run because she'd read this man exactly right. Behind me, I heard Talana move to the stove, calm as a winter pond, and the ordinary domestic clatter of a coffee pot. A woman doing a woman's morning work, nothing to see here. I said, haven't seen a soul in a week. Storms kept me close to the house. The soft-faced man's eyes moved past me again. To the fire, to the second cup on the table, to Talana's back. And I saw the exact moment he saw it, saw his gaze catch and hold on the doorway to the front room, where if he took 2 steps into my house, he would see the foot of the bed and a shape under a quilt, and maybe, God, maybe hear a newborn stir. That your wife back there? He asked, soft. My wife's up on the hill, I said, and I let him hear the 3 years in it, and it had the advantage of being true, and truth, like Talana said, makes the lie around it stronger. You'll have passed her grave coming up, been keeping poorly myself, my cook seeing to me. I nodded back at Talana without turning, like she was furniture, and hated myself for it, and knew it might be the thing that saved her life. You're welcome to water your horses, then I'd be obliged if you moved along. I don't hold with strangers in the house when I'm ill. It hung there, the whole world hung there. The drizzle, the 4 men, the paper in the gloved hand, the sleeping woman, the child, the Apache healer at my stove with her back to armed men and her spine straight as a rifle. The lawman with the borrowed badge shifted his weight. One of the flat-eyed men by the horses spat. And then, and I've thanked God and Ada and Talana's steady hands for it 10,000 times, the baby did not cry. And Sundry, my ill-tempered, half-eared, God-sent dog, chose that exact moment to come stand in the doorway beside my leg and fix the soft-faced man with a low, endless, promising growl, 40 pounds of yellow menace, saying plainer than I ever could. There is nothing here for you but teeth. The soft-faced man looked at the dog. He looked at me. He looked one last time at the 2 strong coffee and the sick man's house and the Indian cook, and he did the sum, and it came out boring, and boring was what I'd bet everything on. Appreciate your time, he said, and folded his paper away. If she turns up dark hair with child you send to the Callum place at Wilcox, there's money in it for the man who does. I'll remember, I said, and I have every day exactly what his money was worth. They watered their horses. They rode out. I stood in the door and watched them the whole half-mile to the rise, and only when the last hat dropped below it did my legs give out, and I sat down hard on my own porch step in the drizzle, and Talana came and sat down beside me, an Apache woman and a white rancher side by side on a wet step, having just lied 4 men off a doorstep, and neither of us said a word for a long while. Then Talana said, "You lie better than you think, Eli Crane." "You stand better than any soldier I ever saw," I said. She almost smiled. "I have had practice," she said, "at being no one worth the trouble. And there was a whole history in that, a whole people's history, 40 years of learning to make yourself small and dull and unremarkable so that armed men would ride past instead of stopping, and I heard it, and I was ashamed of every rancher who'd ever made her learn it, myself included, and I said the only thing there was to say, which was, 'Thank you.' And she nodded and we sat, and behind us at last, the baby woke and cried that furious, living, magnificent noise, and both of us, without meaning to, laughed. They didn't ride away for good. I want to say that first so you don't get comfortable, because I didn't get to. Men like the soft-faced one in the good coat don't take boring for a final answer. They take it for a this-time answer. And a rancher who's been lied to knows in his gut when a thing's over and when it's only paused, and this was only paused. I knew it sitting on that wet step. I knew we'd bought a day, maybe 2, not a life. So the question that filled the house those next days wasn't, are they gone? It was, what now? Nora healed slow. Talana stayed 3 days, then had to go back to her people before her absence brought them trouble, and the leaving of her was its own small grief. I'd known the woman 4 days, and I'd have given her half my herd, half my land, anything, and all she'd take was a sack of coffee and a promise. "You'll come to me," she said, "if the mother bleeds again or the child fevers. You know the way now. Ride in the open. Call out from the tree line so my people know your face." She looked at Nora asleep and at the baby, and something moved over her that hollow-eyed face, some old ache easing by a hair. "I have birthed many," she said. "I do not always get to see them grow. This one," she stopped. "You send me word how she grows, Eli Crane." I said I would. I have. 40 years of words sent up into those hills, and for a long while words coming back. But that's ahead of the story. Talana rode out on the 4th morning, and I stood in the yard and watched her braid go over the rise, the same rise the soft-faced men had gone over. And I thought about how the same horizon can swallow the best person you know and the worst, and how you never can tell by looking which one's coming back. Here is the part I have never told anyone straight, because it's the part where I found out what kind of man I really was, and it turned out to be a harder, colder kind than I'd have guessed. On the 6th day, Nora was strong enough to sit up and talk, and she told me the whole of it. The land her husband had left, the paper his brother had forged, the 2 men in Wilcox who'd have testified to whatever they were paid to testify to, and the plain fact, which she stated without a tear, having spent all her tears on the road, that if she went back or was taken back, she would be dead inside a season, and it would be called an accident or called madness, and her daughter would be raised by the man who'd killed her mother, on land that was blood money, and would never know. "So I can't go back," Nora said, "and I can't stay, because he'll come here again, and next time he'll come with more men and less patience, and I won't have you lying on my account and getting yourself killed for a stranger and her baby." She looked at me steady. "I've thought about it. I'm going to take her and go north. New country, new name. There's a widow with a baby and no husband every 100 miles between here and Montana. I'll be one more, and no one will look twice. Her voice caught. One time, the only time, I needed to be strong enough to walk first, and I needed her to be strong enough to travel, and I needed to say thank you to a man who didn't have to open his door. And here's where the cold, hard part came, because everything in me wanted to say stay. You have to understand, I was an old man alone with 2 graves and a book he talked to like it was a person. And a storm had blown a family right into my empty house, a woman with more spine than the whole territory and a baby girl with a cry like a war. And for 6 days my house had been loud, had smelled of milk and coffee and life, and I had woken each morning to a reason to get up that wasn't just cattle. Every selfish, lonely, grieving fiber of me wanted to say, don't go north. Marry me or don't. I don't care, just stay. Be my family, let me protect you. Let me not be alone in the ground next to Ada with no one to send words up the hill for me. I opened my mouth to say it. And I looked at her face, at the fear that lived way back behind her eyes, even now, even safe, even 6 days healed. And I understood that if I said stay, she might. Out of gratitude, out of exhaustion, out of the simple animal need to stop running. She'd stay, and the soft-faced man would come back, and staying would get her killed and get her daughter taken, and get me shot on my own porch, and it would be my wanting that did it. My loneliness dressed up as her safety. The bravest thing I ever did wasn't riding into the storm. It wasn't opening the door. It wasn't even the lying. The bravest thing I ever did was close my mouth and say instead, I'll outfit you. Best horse I've got, the gentle mare, she'll take a woman and a babe easy. Money, I've got some put by, it's yours, don't argue. And I'll send you off on the North Road, in the open, in daylight, and I'll make good and sure those men see me, here alone, going about my business, so they never think to look at a widow riding north. I'll be your, what's the word, your decoy. I'll be the boring true thing they stare at while the real thing gets away. Nora looked at me a long moment. She was crying now, quiet, not fighting it. You'd be alone again, she said. I know what this house was before I came. I've slept in it, I know. I was alone before the storm, I said. I'll be alone after, but there'll be a difference. And I meant it, and I found as I said it that it was even true, which surprised me. Before, I was alone and there was nothing in the world that needed me to stay decent. Now there'll be a girl growing up somewhere north with my gentle mare and a mother with a straight spine, and I'll be able to think. They're out there because I opened a door. A man can live a long time on a thing like that. longer than you'd credit. She left on the 8th day. I did exactly as I said. I put her on the mare with the money sewn into the saddle blanket where no road agent would think to cut, and the baby bundled against her in a sling Talana had shown her how to tie. And I rode with her the first 10 miles north in the open in daylight. And then I turned back and made myself real visible around Wilcox for 2 days after, bought supplies I didn't need, talked to men I didn't like, complained loud about being poorly and put upon, and alone, alone, alone. And when the soft-faced man's people came sniffing again, they found exactly what I'd built for them to find. A bitter old widowed rancher rattling around an empty house, obviously hiding nobody, obviously nobody's ally, a dead end. They watched me a week. Then they gave it up because a man that plainly alone is a man with nothing to hide, and I was by then plainly and truly alone, which was the whole cruel genius of it. I made the lie true. I emptied my own house back out on purpose, so that the emptiness would keep her safe 200 miles away. I don't know that I've ever done a harder thing. The baby's name was Ada. Nora named her that the 7th night before she left. She asked me my wife's name. I don't know how she knew to ask. Maybe Talana told her. Maybe she read it off me the way she read everything. And I told her. And she looked down at her daughter and said, Ada then. So there's an Ada Crane in the world growing up no matter where she has to grow. And she said the crane on purpose, too, gave my dead wife's name to a living child, and I had to go stand out on the porch a while over that one. The first letter came the next spring, from a town in Montana I won't name, unsigned, in a hand I didn't know that said only, the mare is fat and lazy. The girl has your dog's temper. We are safe. A friend of a friend on a hill. I sent word up to Talana's people that the child was well. I sent word every spring for years. And every spring an unsigned letter came south, and I read it out loud to 2 graves on a hill and to a weather book. And for a good long stretch of years, I was the least alone man in the whole territory, because I had a secret family in the north and a friend in the hills and a dog that outlived all reasonable expectation. And I filled a whole shelf of books with the sky and the letters and the growing up of a girl I met on the night she was born and never saw again. Talana passed in the winter of some years back. Her people sent a boy down to tell me, which was an honor I have never deserved, and I rode up in the open and called out from the tree line like she taught me, and they let me stand at the edge of things a while, an old white rancher paying respect to the finest person he ever knew, and then I rode home and wrote it in the book. She stood better than any soldier I ever saw. She came when she owed us nothing. There is a girl grown up in Montana because a woman remembered her own grief and rode into a storm. I didn't say the rest of it. Some things you leave for the reader to know. The letters from the north stopped coming 3 springs ago. I don't know why. I try not to know why. A person can build a whole peaceful story about why letters stop. She married, she moved. The girl grew up and took over the writing and got busy with her own living, which is the whole entire point, which is what you want. And a person can build a darker story too, and I have built both, lying awake, and I have decided, the way you decide the weather by choosing which cloud to believe, that Ada Crane is alive somewhere with her mother's straight spine and my mare's grandfuls and my dog's temper. And that she is too busy living the free, unhunted life. I emptied my house to buy her to sit down and write an old man she never met. That's the story I choose. I'm near the end of my own weather now. I can feel it the way you feel a front coming, a pressure, a change in the light. When it comes, I'll go up on the hill with Ada and the little one, and there'll be a 3rd stone before long, and someone will have to write the last entry in the book, and I've left instructions that it go north. Unsigned, to the last town I had an address for, in case a young woman with my dog's temper ever wonders where she came from. I hope she reads it on a clear day. I hope when she gets to the part about the storm, she understands that the door I opened was the only good thing I ever did that cost me everything, and that I would open it again, tonight, storm and all, for the sound of one furious newborn cry in a house that had gone too quiet. I hope she keeps a book of her own. And I hope, on the day she has to make a decision that shakes her hands and calls her a coward with every step to the door,